When people talked about soul food, all they thought of was fried chicken and mac and cheese. Nobody mentioned the oxtail that cooks low and slow all Sunday long, passed down from grandparents who shared recipes by word of mouth, far from any cookbook. Every dish carries the way Black families have held on and resisted, and from the very first bite, you can feel that this story still has a lot more to tell. Number 1, smothered pork chops. At first glance, it just looks like a simple dish, but it was born from the need to turn a little into a lot. In the American South, Black families turned the kitchen into a place of resistance. Cheap cuts became food that looked like a celebration and fed everyone at the table, even when money was tight. During the Great Migration, this way of cooking traveled with the people who left the South. Bone-in pork chops were always on the list. They were cheaper at the butcher or showed up in swaps around the neighborhood and still made folks feel pampered on hard days. The prep followed a ritual: salt, black pepper, paprika, garlic powder, and, when possible, a touch of cayenne. Then a coat of flour, a hot skillet, searing until browned and setting them aside. In the same pan, sliced onions, sometimes green bell pepper. A bit of water or broth loosened up the browned bits from the bottom and turned into a thick, caramel-colored gravy. The chops went back in and simmered slowly until they were almost falling apart. Served with white rice, cabbage, or buttery mashed potatoes, they weren't just a main dish. They were a reminder of the people who learned how to pull flavor out of every scrap. Number 2, collard greens with smoked turkey neck. Long before the internet started calling anything a superfood, plenty of Black kitchens already revolved around a pot of greens, with conversation running through the house. The story of this recipe starts in West Africa, where leafy greens went into the pot with meat and strong seasoning, part of everyday life and a way to turn a little into a lot. When that habit crossed the Atlantic and landed in the American South, collard greens stopped being a side note. They started to mark feelings: Sunday lunch after church, food served at a funeral, a relative visiting from far away, the New Year's table. In many homes, people say those greens call in money, hold on to luck, and protect the family for the year ahead. For decades, the flavor base came from pig's feet, salt pork, or neck bones. Over time, folks who wanted something a bit lighter began swapping in smoked turkey necks, which keep the salt and smoke with less fat. The greens are still treated with ceremonial care, washed leaf by leaf, sliced thin, and left to cook with the turkey, onion, garlic, red pepper flakes, vinegar, and a few dashes of hot sauce until they're submerged in the broth called pot liquor, ready to catch a piece of cornbread or be saved to warm the body another day. Number 3, sweet potato pie. In many Black families, Thanksgiving didn't really start until this pie hit the table. It wasn't just dessert, it was the matriarch's signature. Everybody else could chop vegetables, season the turkey, set the table, but that pie tin had an owner and nobody argued. The recipe crossed generations, saved in notebooks and in the memory of whoever learned by watching. Sweet potatoes, tied to the African diaspora, became a base of Black Southern cooking. While pumpkin pie ruled white tables, sweet potato pie spoke to the African American palate, just sweet enough and loaded with memories. First, the sweet potatoes went into the oven whole, never into water, so the sugar could concentrate. Then they were mashed until smooth and mixed with eggs, evaporated milk, brown sugar, cinnamon, and lemon or orange zest. The crust could be store-bought or homemade, but it had to be buttery and flaky. Over time, some families started topping the filling with marshmallows or a pecan crumble. The classic way, though, left the top smooth, brushed with egg and sugar until it shone. The first slice went to the eldest person at the table, and nobody asked for seconds before everyone had been served. Because it wasn't just a sweet treat. It was respect, memory, and affection, which came back the next day alongside coffee and stories. Number 4, fried catfish. In a lot of black families, talking about a Sunday get-together means remembering a crowded backyard and that cloud of smell rising from hot oil. There was almost always someone in charge of the frying, and on the main platter, the star of the show was catfish. A river fish from the south, cheap and plentiful, it became the answer to feeding a lot of people without blowing the budget. The ritual started early. The fillets took a quick bath in buttermilk, which made the meat tender and pulled out any muddy taste. Then they dove into seasoned cornmeal with pepper, garlic powder, paprika, and that one ingredient every family swore was the secret to the crunch. From the cornmeal, they went straight into bubbling peanut oil, where the sizzle announced that the food was coming. Around them, picnic tables filled up with pans of golden fish, jugs of sweet tea, coleslaw, baked beans, sliced white bread on the side, and plenty of hot sauce. Some people only accepted their plate with a squeeze of lemon. Others stood by Auntie's tartar sauce. And when the party was over, there was still the bonus of the next day: cold catfish on a sandwich with mustard. What started as a survival strategy turned into a warm memory of a full house, loud conversation, and folks gathered around the same tray. Number 5, Hoppin' John. At first glance, it looks like just rice, black-eyed peas, and pork, but this dish carries a story of faith, adaptation, and survival. In Senegalese traditions and among the Gula people, rice and beans kept people going through the day. When enslaved Africans were taken to the American South, they brought that knowledge in their memory and, even under violence and lack, found a way to recreate the taste of home using what was left over on the plantations. Black-eyed peas from the gardens, rice from the Carolina coast, and scraps of pork left from the big house kitchen, sometimes bacon, sometimes a smoked hog's foot. Over time, Hoppin' John became New Year's food. The peas came to stand for coins, the greens served alongside symbolized paper money, and the table became a place to bet on the future. Outside the holidays, it stayed steady in everyday life. It was a dish meant to feed big families, stretching the rice and beans while the pork came in just enough to perfume the pot when money was tight. And if there were leftovers, even better. The next day, it turned into Skippin' Jenny, repurposed with pride, reminding everyone that taking good care of every portion is also a way of caring for the people who sit at the table. Number 6, hoe cakes. At first, they look like little cornmeal pancakes, but each one carries a story of labor, hunger, and black invention. On plantations in the American South, when there was no stove and no proper kitchen, the batter was spread onto the flat side of a hoe and set right over an open fire out there in the fields. That's what kept bodies upright until the end of the day. The base was simple: cornmeal, water, salt, and, when it showed up, a bit of lard or bacon grease. Almost nothing turned into a meal. Over time, as black families left the plantations and built their own homes, the recipe gained buttermilk and eggs. The texture got softer, but the idea stayed the same. In rural kitchens, hoe cakes became an everyday kind of bread. They went with collards, beans, stews, and then wiped the plate clean at the end. They were rarely written down in books. They appeared on the hot griddle first thing in the morning, sizzling, crisp edges, golden inside, ready for butter, honey, or syrup, filling the kitchen with smell and memory. Even today, on many southern tables, this hoe bread keeps showing up, connecting the people who cook now to those who had to create food in the middle of scarcity. Number 7. Smoked pig's feet with butter beans. Picture opening the pot and seeing that glossy, thick broth with a bone right in the middle. This cut, the kind rich folks used to turn their nose up at, became the foundation of survival in a lot of African-American homes during the Jim Crow era. The foot went into the pot and simmered for hours, giving everything back in the form of flavor. No bouillon cube in sight. The seasoning was thyme, low heat, and fat slowly rendering. On the other side came the butter beans, brought to the Americas in exchanges between indigenous and African peoples, cheap, always there in the pantry of black families. When they met the smoky broth with onion, garlic, and pepper, every bean soaked up that liquid until it almost fell apart. It turned into a thick pot of beans, perfect for scraping the bottom of the bowl with a spoon, bread, or whatever was on hand. It wasn't party food, it was weekday food, late-night food, for people getting home tired from work. The pot sat there, bubbling on the stove, setting the rhythm of the house and holding everybody close to the table. And when there were leftovers, the next day it came back over rice or next to a wedge of cornbread, just to make sure not a single drop of that broth went to waste. Number 8. Gullah red rice. Among soul food dishes, this is the one that keeps history in every grain. Along the coastal areas of South Carolina and Georgia, the Gullah Geechee people, descendants of enslaved Africans, lived in relative isolation and kept their language and cooking closely tied to the other side of the ocean. That's why red rice looks like African jollof and works like a bridge between continents, grandparents, children, and grandchildren. In the pot, the prep starts with long grain rice, sautéed in whatever fat is available, bacon when they had it, plain oil when there was nothing else. Then in go onion, bell pepper, garlic, and crushed tomatoes, which build the base of the dish. Thyme, cayenne, and celery seed warm up the aroma. When money was a little looser, smoked sausage, chicken gizzards, or shrimp joined the party. On tight days, the dish held firm with the sauce full of flavor and just the right acidity. In Gullah homes, red rice showed up at church dinners, birthday parties, and Sunday family meals. The color of the tomatoes was seen as a sign of abundance and blessing, and everyone knew the unspoken rule. If the rice turned out too dry or too mushy, it was a warning of carelessness. This dish demands constant attention and respect for the people who came before. Number 9. Chicken and dumplings. In the kitchens of many black families, especially during the Depression and the war years, a single chicken had to feed everyone. Chicken and dumplings became the strategy mothers and grandmothers used to make the meat reach every plate. First, the whole bird went into the pot with onion, celery, garlic, bay leaf, and black pepper, simmering until it was full of flavor and very tender. Then it was shredded, pulled from the bones, and put back into the broth, which was already rich and thick. The dumplings were born from that same broth: flour, a bit of fat, milk, or water. The dough was rolled thin and cut into strips or rounds that slipped into the bubbling hot stock. They cooked until they were firm on the outside and soft on the inside. In some homes, the dumplings came out flat and wide, almost like ribbons. In others, they puffed up higher, more like little biscuits. The result was always the same: a steaming pot in the middle of the table, ladles going back and forth, stretching the chicken just a little farther and lengthening the conversation, the togetherness, and the care among the people sitting around it. It wasn't party food, but a straightforward way to guarantee a hot meal and silently remember who was taking care of whom. Number 10, ginger cake with molasses. Late afternoon, the house filled with a warm smell calling everybody to the kitchen. In many black families, for a long time that smell came from a ginger cake sweetened with molasses. Before white sugar took over the shelves, it was molasses that handled the sweetness of everyday life, cheaper and more intense. This cake was anything but light. The crumb was dense, moist, sticking to your fingers. The flavor came in layers: ginger, clove, cinnamon, and allspice, mixing together like old folks' conversation, full of stories. It baked in a cast-iron skillet or a dented pan marked by years of use. It usually showed up in fall and winter when the cold settled in and the family drew close. Someone poured black coffee or filled glasses with buttermilk, and the slices disappeared from the plate without ceremony. There was almost never a piece left for the next day. A lot of older folks say this was the first dessert they ever learned to make. No cookbook, no exact measurements, just watching. "You know it's ready when the batter hugs the spoon," a grandmother would tell her attentive granddaughter. Each slice remembers the time when sweetening life required patience and respect for every ingredient. Number 11, oxtail stew. For a long time, this cut was seen as scraps, cheap, bony, left on the side of the counter. In the hands of black cooks, it turned into a point of pride, a deep stew that could stand up to any expensive restaurant dish. The transformation starts in a hot pot. The oxtail goes in and browns slowly, building a crust that locks in flavor. Then comes the base: onion, garlic, tomato paste, a splash of Worcestershire sauce, and enough broth to cover. When they were around, in went allspice berries, thyme, bay leaf, or a touch of Caribbean pepper that perfumed the whole house. From there on, it's low heat and time. The meat softens and pulls away from the bone almost on its own. The marrow melts into the liquid, thickening the sauce and giving it body without flour. At serving time, the stew is ladled over fluffy rice or buttery noodles and becomes the center of the table. It's not a rushed meal. It's a dish made to gather people, family, neighbors, friends. The pot arrives, the conversation slows down, spoons scrape the bottom. Someone is already thinking about the next helping, and the oxtail makes it clear that what the world calls scraps still has a lot of story left to tell. Number 12, chitlins. A lot of people make a face just hearing the name because they know the dish comes from pork intestines and carries a strong smell, heavy memories, and divided opinions. But behind that pot, there's a story that stretches across generations. During slavery, black people were given what was left from the slaughter: feet, ears, tails, organ meats, intestines. That's where the hard work began, washing chitlins for hours, removing every bit of residue, then cooking them low and slow with vinegar, onion, garlic, and spices until the smell eased up and the meat turned tender. In many families, there was a famous chitlin queen, usually an older person, respected for knowing the exact point and running the stove on special days. For decades, this dish almost only showed up on holidays and big gatherings, especially in the South, like a celebration built on top of having no choice. These days, when someone serves chitlins, it's not just about taste or curiosity. It's a thread that ties the table to a painful past imposed out in the fields, a way of facing a hard history that can't be ignored. Number 13, candied sweet potatoes. A lot of people call it a side dish, but in many families it's this pan that really runs the show at celebrations. The English name is misleading. There's almost never any real yam in there. The star is sweet potato, which took the place of African yams when the tradition crossed the Atlantic with enslaved people. They brought the custom of celebrating with a tuber dish, and in the New World rebuilt the recipe with whatever they had on hand. In the kitchen, the prep turned into a small ritual. Thick slices went into a buttered baking dish. On top, brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and a bit more melted butter. In some homes, in went orange juice, vanilla, or a splash of bourbon. Then the pan went into the oven until the sweet potatoes softened and the syrup thickened, clinging to the edges of the dish. The smell filled the house long before dinner because plenty of people made it ahead of time. On the plate, the candied sweet potatoes pressed up against collards, stuffing, and turkey, creating a sweet savory mix that became a soul food signature. Not really dessert, but memory served in generous spoonfuls. Number 14, red drink. In a lot of black homes, everybody recognizes that big cup of red drink that shows up even before the food. It's already there, in the middle of the table, waiting for the first sip. Nobody calls it grape juice, much less strawberry soda. It's just red drink. Behind that simple red is a long road. The drink is born from hibiscus teas in West Africa, like bissap and zobo, prepared at gatherings, prayers, and celebrations. When African people were enslaved in the Americas, almost everything was taken from them, but some memories stayed alive, and one of them was this custom. Without hibiscus on hand, folks reinvented it. Kool-Aid, red sodas, punches with pineapple, lemon, or cranberry. Every family made its own version, but a few rules stuck. It has to be ice cold, a bold red, and served in enough quantity for everyone. The color can suggest the blood shed in the fight for freedom, but also the loud laughter of people who keep gathering, and that's why when the red drink shows up, it announces that the party and the story goes on. Number 15, grits with cheese and butter. Before they turned into pretty pictures on social media, they were just a steaming pot on the stove in black southern kitchens. Coarsely ground corn falling into hot water, stirred constantly so it wouldn't lump up. First came the salt, then the butter slowly melting in, adding shine. In many homes, there was also a shower of shredded cheddar, making the porridge thicker and more intense. It was cheap food, but full of meaning. It kept people going who left early for work and was also served when company showed up. On the plate, grits paired with fried eggs, sausage, bacon, or stood on their own, just them and a spoon. And they had another trick up their sleeve. They didn't belong only to breakfast. They came back at night in a stronger version, like in shrimp and grits, created by fishermen on the Carolina coast. When there were leftovers, nothing went in the trash. The mixture went into a pan, rested until firm, was cut into strips, and fried until it formed a crust. For a lot of kids who grew up in that setting, waking up meant hearing the sound of a spoon scraping the bottom of the pot and knowing the day had officially started. Number 16, peach cobbler. Before it reached the table, it started in the backyard when ripe peaches filled buckets and bowls. In Southern homes, black women and men took whatever they had: seasonal fruit, a little sugar, carefully measured flour, just enough butter. It wasn't much, but it turned into care. In the late afternoon, someone peeled and sliced the peaches, mixing them with cinnamon, nutmeg, and a squeeze of lemon to cut through the sweetness. The dough wasn't fancy pastry. It was dropped on top by the spoonful, patted into place with fingers, and the oven took care of browning it into a firm crust. Everything went into a cast-iron skillet, which sizzled when the juices started to thicken and caramelize around the edges. It came out bubbling, heading straight to the table, served with quickly melting ice cream or a bit of cold cream. Peach cobbler wasn't an everyday dessert. It appeared on full Sundays, long visits, quiet goodbyes, and shy first dates. The most fought-over piece was always the corner of the pan, with extra crust and chewy edges, saved for the oldest person, as if that spot held everyone's memories at once. Number 17, pork neckbone soup. Neckbone soup was born out of lack, but stayed because of flavor. The neck was the piece the white butcher didn't want and often went straight into the trash. In the hands of black cooks, it turned into treasure. They knew that the flavor that carries a dish lives in the bone. First, the neck bones were browned to render their fat and build the base in the bottom of the pot. Then in went water, onion, garlic, and whatever else was available, simmering slowly until the broth thickened. The meat started to pull away in tender shreds that barely needed a knife. Each family took its own path. Some added potatoes, carrots, and celery. Others used cabbage, beans, or corn. The seasoning was straightforward: salt, pepper, maybe a bay leaf. No chef's secrets, just practice and a trained eye. In many black homes, this was everyday food, made to fill bellies without breaking the budget. During the Great Depression, the post-war years, and in so many tight kitchens, this soup reminded people that improvising doesn't mean settling for less. It means drawing strength out of what the world tried to call leftovers. Number 18, black-eyed pea fritters. Before they started showing up in glossy cookbooks, they were already a steady presence in the routine of many black families. No shortcuts. The peas were picked over, soaked, peeled, and ground by hand in a process that took hours. Out of that batter came a kara, a black-eyed pea fritter typical of West Africa, very common in Senegal, where it still appears on street trays today, right next to spicy sauces and pieces of bread. When that tradition crossed the ocean and reached the American South, it took on a new role at the table. In coastal communities, especially in Gula areas, the peas beaten with onion, garlic, and salt went straight into hot oil, turning into golden fritters, crisp on the outside and soft on the inside. Sometimes bell pepper went in, sometimes green onion, almost always a sauce to seal the flavor, sometimes spicier, sometimes tangier. A kara was never just a snack. Each fritter works like a thread tying together continents, memories, and people, helping history cross centuries, even when names, accents, and habits almost disappeared. And that's how, from hand to hand, it keeps moving around. Number 19, baked mac and cheese. Not the quick boxed kind, but the dish that turned into an event. It showed up on crowded Sunday tables, on holidays, or when a special guest arrived. More than just macaroni and cheese, it was a quiet way of saying, "I care about you." Everything started on the stove. Butter and flour met in the pan, then came the milk and, little by little, the cheeses, cheddar, Colby, or whatever was on hand. Whoever had Velveeta added that too, chasing that creaminess that hugs the pasta. Once cooked, the macaroni dove into the thick sauce, slid into a buttered baking dish, and got its crown. More grated cheese or a mix of breadcrumbs, butter, and a guarded family secret. Every home had its own trick: eggs to help it set, evaporated milk to thicken it up. But there was one common rule: it had to go into the oven until it bubbled. Stovetop-only mac and cheese didn't really count. The goal was clear: soft inside, golden on top, crunchy at the corners. At big gatherings, only one person was allowed to make the dish, a title earned after years of compliments. And whoever grabbed the last corner piece knew they were stepping into sensitive territory, always watched by some watchful aunt. Number 20, buttermilk biscuits. At home, sweet potato pie was the star of celebrations, but these little breads carried the everyday. In the kitchens of many black families, they started early, while the coffee brewed and the house was still quiet. No notebook open on the counter, just flour, baking powder, salt, cold fat, and buttermilk, measured by the eyes of someone who learned by trial and error. The hands moved quickly. The dough took shape on a floured table, was folded, rolled out, and cut with the rim of a glass. The cast-iron pan was already hot and waiting, and in just a few minutes the smell would drift through every room and call everyone in without a word. Inside, they stayed fluffy. On the bottom, a firm golden crust that cracked when you broke them open. Each biscuit turned into something different: an improvised sandwich, a base for catching gravy at lunch, comfort on a hard morning, or just a vehicle for a pat of butter melting in the steam. When that dented old tin showed up on the table, eyes met. Everyone knew that even if they copied every one of Grandma's moves, there was still a secret they couldn't reproduce. It lived in the time spent standing in front of that stove. Number 21, sorghum syrup on everything. Before corn syrup and maple syrup took over breakfast, what sweetened the table in many black Southern families was sorghum syrup. From the tall canes came a juice squeezed by hand, boiled down into a thick, dark liquid, smelling of smoke and tasting of earth and caramel. It didn't resemble the white sugar from the bag. Heavy, it clung to the spoon, the plate, and the memory of whoever grew up with it. And it didn't stop at biscuits or pancakes. It went into hot grits, simple marinades, was brushed over Sunday meat, and poured into coffee when the sugar ran out. In black communities in Appalachia, rural Alabama, and Georgia, this was the sweetness that was actually possible during the Depression and the war years, when refined sugar was a luxury or a rationed item. Maybe you remember a dented metal can in your grandparents' pantry, dark on the outside, with a rusty lid that took effort to pry open. Inside was a glossy, thick shine, a flavor passed from hand to hand. These days, you hardly see sorghum syrup on store shelves, but for the people who grew up with it, that taste stays firm, sweet, never shallow, a memory of a kitchen that learned not to waste a single drop. Number 22, liver and onions. It's not just a controversial dish that splits the family between the people who go back for seconds and the ones who hide from the smell. For a lot of folks, it was a childhood scene, a day when money was tight and the pot was full, When organ meat wasn't an alternative, it was the meat that fit the budget and fed everyone. Among black families, especially from the 1940s through the 1970s, this dish became almost a quiet code for care. First, the liver soaked in milk to tame its strong flavor. Then came garlic, salt, lemon, a quick dip in flour, and a hot skillet with fat sizzling. In the same pan, onion rings went in, softening slowly until they browned and turned slightly sweet. In the end, they slid over the meat as if covering that simple steak with a gesture of affection. Served with white rice or mashed potatoes, it took over the whole table and, at the same time, silently announced that someone had turned a few ingredients into a real presence around the plate. Kids turned up their noses, pretended to refuse, but soon realized that what came in that dish was a big helping of care. Number 23, chicken gizzards. A lot of people walk right past them at the butcher, but this is where black cooking shows its logic. Everything has a purpose. Nothing is thrown away. The gizzard is the tough muscle of the chicken's stomach. That's why it's first washed, cleaned carefully, and cooked until it gives in. From there, you pick a path into a hot skillet to brown and crisp so it crackles between your teeth, or into a deep pot full of broth and seasoning until it's so tender it falls apart under a fork. Fried, it turns into a bar snack or something sold from the front porch, served in a little paper bag with salt, garlic, paprika, cayenne, sometimes onion and parsley. People eat it standing at the counter, dipping it in hot sauce or mustard, between quick talk and loud laughter. In many families, the gizzards went straight onto the plate of whoever ran the stove, a quiet way of showing respect. And there's an unwritten rule. If someone is leaning on the counter, eating gizzards in silence before dinner, that's the person in charge there. Number 24. Cornbread dressing. Our dish starts days before the table fills up. First, the cornbread is baked, then it rests and dries out until it can be crumbled into big pieces in a deep bowl. In go celery, onion, sage, maybe bell pepper, maybe chopped hard-boiled egg. Chicken broth gets poured in with no hard measurements, just until the mixture is moist in the right way. A few beaten eggs help bind it all together, and everything goes into a baking dish, where the top forms a golden crust, the edges firm up, and the center stays soft. When the smell reaches every corner of the house, the chatter quiets down, someone starts the prayer, and everybody knows Thanksgiving has officially begun. In many families, there's a silent competition. Everyone swears they make the best dressing. Some people add oysters, some use canned cream of chicken soup, some guard the recipe like a secret. In the end, the test is simple. The piece has to stay put on the fork, melt in your mouth, and remind whoever came back home just for that taste exactly why they did. Number 25. Blackberry cobbler. This cobbler almost never started as a plan. It showed up when someone noticed the yard dotted with purple spots, the brambles clinging to fences, and the dirt road behind the house. The kids ran out with old coffee cans and came back scratched up, sweaty, holding their treasure in both hands. In the kitchen, the berries hit the sink, got a quick rinse, and met sugar and a splash of lemon before sliding into a well-greased baking dish. On top went the dough, dropped by the spoonful or laid out in crisscrossed strips when patience allowed. The dish disappeared into the oven until the smell of hot fruit took over everything and the topping cracked and browned. At that point, nobody thought about conversation. Each steaming, sweet, slightly tart spoonful stolen straight from the corner of the pan made the whole table focus on that one dessert. When a bit was left over, it came back the next day, warmed up alongside coffee, tasting like summer hanging on a little longer. These 25 African-American recipes aren't just dishes that look good on a screen. Each one was born from hands that cooked to bring family together, ease homesickness, and turn a little into a feast. Maybe one of these seasonings made you think of your grandmother in the kitchen, a loud Sunday, a crowded table, and the stories that always showed up between one bite and the next. If that happened, you already understand the weight each recipe carries. So share this video with someone who needs to rekindle those memories or discover these flavors right now. And if you want to keep traveling through history by way of what we eat, subscribe to the channel. Every week we bring back a recipe that almost disappeared, rebuild the context, tell who made it, why they made it, and what's changed since then. So these memories don't vanish from our plate, our conversations, or the place where we recognize ourselves in and out of the kitchen.